Saludos. Me alegro que Natalie Jaresko, la directora ejecutiva de la Junta de Supervisión, y nuestro secretario de Hacienda, Francisco Parés, van a estar llevando a cabo este conversatorio en Conéctate con Hacienda. Es importante que repasemos los logros que hemos tenido trabajando en colaboración, tanto el Gobierno de Puerto Rico con la Junta de Supervisión, y que también tracemos la ruta que tenemos por delante ahora con la salida de Natalie de la Junta. En esa ruta tenemos que reformar nuestro sistema de personal público, una reforma del servicio civil en Puerto Rico. Y yo sé que se va a hacer tema de discusión entre Natalie y Francisco. Natalie, gracias a nombre del pueblo de Puerto Rico por tu servicio y te deseo lo mejor en el futuro.
Bienvenido a todos a esta conversación especial con la directora ejecutiva de la Junta de Supervisión Fiscal, Natalie Jaresko, y con el secretario del Departamento de Hacienda, Francisco Parés. Vamos a estar teniendo esta importante conversación sobre la reforma del servicio público. La conversación la vamos a tener en inglés, así que vamos a estar haciendo un switch a inglés para las preguntas. Así que vamos a empezar con unas preguntas del secretario y estaremos teniendo esta conversación importante sobre la reforma del servicio público. Switch to English now. The civil service reform is a reform that seeks to improve the way the Commonwealth manages its talent, how it manages recruitment processes, how it evaluates employees, how it pays employees to ensure employees have a competitive salary, and how it makes sure organizations are restructured in a way so employees are placed in the right place with the right set of skills. So, Secretary Parés, I want to start with you. We had a conversation a long time ago that stuck with me. This is like a very personal reform for you, and you said something around being embarrassed when you went to the elevator with the other employees. It was very compelling to hear you talk about the passion you have for the employees of Hacienda. So why is this so personal for you, and why this reform is so important for you?
From my end, since I commenced in the department, I started to notice how many economic inequalities we have been seeing here. And obviously, previous government has been ignoring the fact that most of our people has been undercompensated. When we analyze their functions and duties and responsibilities and the pay scale, certainly many of the people within Hacienda has been underpaid since long time ago. Since the COVID-19 specifically, from my personal take, I think that the team in Hacienda has helped me to create more trust from the people in Puerto Rico on Hacienda, and this has to be repaid some way or the other. So I didn't want to leave the agency without putting together a reform that actually allows to have better quality of life for our people within Hacienda, since they have been doing so much with so less. And that is why for me it was so embarrassing to share the elevators with my co-workers and noticing how they have been living since many years ago. So quite frankly, I'm extremely thankful for the opportunity to commence a reform within Hacienda. I've been saying that it is not going to be perfect, but perfection is the biggest enemy of good things. And this reform, in the bottom line, is going to be a good thing for the people in Hacienda. So my recommendation to my coworkers is to allow the implementation herein. Obviously, I think patience is going to be something that we need to consider on this. Some people is going to be affected sooner, but at the end of the day, more than 73% of the headcount in Hacienda is going to be positively impacted by this reform, and that is why it's so personal to me.
Thank you, Secretary. Natalie, the government actually came to the board a couple of years ago with a proposal for a uniform remuneration plan. You know, there's been issues with every agency having their own compensation structure, so there was the idea that's uniform compensation. So the government did come to the board with a new pay structure, a new uniform remuneration plan that was going to cost around $100 million salary increases based on that implementation. But the board at the time said that any compensation reform needed to be tied to a civil service reform. So why was it important for the board to tie new compensation structures with a civil service reform?
So I think the critical issue for the board was making sure that whatever happened, it would advance the effectiveness of the government and the employees. And so looking at what's happened in other jurisdictions in other parts of the United States and abroad, civil service pay increases alone don't necessarily result in effective civil service. And so we tried to pair that increase in pay, which is absolutely needed and necessary, with other things that are very important to making sure that civil service is effective. So one is evaluations. You know, everyone wants to know how well they're doing when they're doing their job. They want feedback, they want mentoring, they want coaching, they want direction. And I think the evaluation process had not been implemented in Puerto Rico, and it's something that every employee deserves. They deserve the ability to develop in their job above and beyond the money that they're getting paid. So that was one piece that we thought was really necessary. The second one had to do with watching through different governors and different governments how recruitment happens and how recruitment had turned into patronage in some ways. And, you know, good qualified people were not finding it possible to be recruited. They couldn't get their foot in the door. People who want to serve the people of Puerto Rico, people who want to be in the government, couldn't necessarily get their foot in the door because there wasn't a transparent, professional recruitment system. So that was something we wanted to make sure happened so that more qualified people could come and work and serve the people of Puerto Rico. I think the last piece was just making sure that everyone's in the right place, that the organization is, you know, maximizing its ability to use the talents, the skills, the energies of every individual. And so that, you know, people who have a skill set in a particular area are using that skill set and are able to provide that. So the organizational structure reform, looking and matching skill sets with jobs, skill sets with needs, was another really important part for the board when they looked at matching or tying increase in pay with civil service reform. The last thing I'd raise is that we just wanted to be sure that the proposed salaries themselves in the URP were market. In other words, if you're going to go through the trouble of creating the classifications, are you creating them with full knowledge of what the market requires and demands for those skill sets? Are we really doing something that's kind of, I'm not going to say permanent, it's not permanent, but it's meaningful and it makes sense and it's market oriented. So we wanted to have the time to kind of look through that URP and make sure those salaries were enough, make sure they were reasonable, make sure they were market.
And that's a good point that Natalie brings, Secretary Parés, because one of the salary increases are a very obvious part of the reform, and there's a commitment from the oversight board to make that investment. But one not so obvious is the reorganization of finance and accounting operations at Hacienda. So our team has been working with your team and reorganizing central accounting, treasury, economic analysis, and also identifying the need for new positions. You know, Hacienda had about 5,000 employees like 20 years ago. Now it has less than 2,000. So it's not the same Hacienda. Technology changes have really changed dramatically how Hacienda operates. The citizens are demanding different things now. So why was it important to reorganize central accounting and treasury? And how do you think that those new org structures that you are going to present to employees are going to help Hacienda provide better outcomes on financial management?
Well, basically, Governor Pierluisi is following the Constitution, and the Constitution gives some big responsibilities to the Department of Treasury, Hacienda. And having said that, he issued an executive order that actually centralized all the fiscal and financial responsibilities through Hacienda, obviously with the support of the OMB and the support of AFAF. But certainly the stone here is going to be how good we are implementing those fiscal aspects within Hacienda. Having said that, we need to actually create an environment for a recruitment process that allows us to recruit the best talent possible and share the knowledge from the private sector and our public employees that have been here for almost decades. And obviously, we need to reform those aspects prior to implement an efficient and effective centralization process of the financial management of the government of Puerto Rico. Having said that, this civil service reform allows us to be in a better position to execute that executive order issued by Governor Pierluisi, and that is why he was so committed since being elected. We had some conversations as part of the transition process with Governor Pierluisi back in 2020 that later on it transformed to a recruitment process, allowing me to stay as Secretary of the Puerto Rico Treasury. And I think this is the first step towards that centralization process, having the best talent as possible so we can actually perform all the ambitious duties and responsibilities that the governor delegated in Hacienda.
And I was going to do a follow-up question, Secretary, because Natalie mentioned the need to do market-based analysis on salaries, right? If we're going to do this and we don't put the right salaries in place, we're going to have to go back and we're not going to be able to recruit, or we're not going to be able to retain the talent. So you and your staff have been working with us in those market analysis. And how do you feel about now with the market analysis that's going to be applied to the salary adjustments?
I think it's a great starting point. Obviously, Governor Pierluisi is still pursuing improving the quality of life of all the employees within the government of Puerto Rico. But having this first step, certainly, I think it's going to be in the right direction. Obviously, I've been saying to our colleagues here that we need to implement this in phases, that some of the offices here in Hacienda will be impacted sooner based on market salaries. That I think is a fair starting point. But at the end of the day, this is obviously in continuous monitoring. We are, as both instrumentalities, we are going to be learning over the course of the implementation. That is why we went through the route of a pilot program that will allow the government of Puerto Rico and the Fiscal Oversight Board to learn the lessons on implementation and continuous the improvement of this type of reform. This is a very ambitious reform. It will have our hiccups in the process, but at the end of the day, and I've been saying this is good for most of the people within Hacienda. And obviously that is why I push this and I promote this. And I think it's one of the biggest steps that the board has taken towards improving the quality of the work within Hacienda.
So Natalie, going back to the whole pilot thing, like a lot of people have been asking, why start with a pilot? Why don't you do it all the way in all the agencies? And if you're going to do a pilot, why finance and accounting? You have a lot of experience working in other jurisdictions and other countries, managing finance and accounting. So why starting with finance and accounting functions so important, and why starting with that versus starting with Department of Family or some other areas? Why starting there is so important, and how starting there is going to help the government improve fiscal management and program management in general?
Well, the first thing is why a pilot? And the reason why a pilot is simply because you need to learn from the people that you're working with. You can't do this from theory. You can't do this from textbooks. You can't do this from consultants. And you really need to be on the ground working with the real people who are really working in an agency. So starting with a smaller group of people allows you to learn and adapt and take into account, yes, theoretical knowledge and yes, the experience of other places, but the specifics of Puerto Rico and the specifics of the real people who are working in government. So a pilot gives us the ability to learn and then, adapt it, replicate it, build it from the pilot. The idea was always to implement this across the entire government. The question is kind of how do you succeed in doing that? And a pilot lets you learn, adapt, and succeed along the way. Why Hacienda and OGP? Well, frankly speaking, the board's a financial management and oversight board, and financial management is the primary thing that the board is responsible for. It's responsible for leaving behind, the law requires that we leave behind better financial management to avoid the practices of the past. OGP and Hacienda are at the very core. They are the core. They are the absolute center of financial management in government. And through the office of the CFO and the CFO himself. The idea was to strengthen that ability, and then they would be able to strengthen financial management in every agency and every public corporation, as the Secretary described, through the centralized effort. They would be able to then replicate that financial management. Why financial management's important? Well, in the end, it really defines everything. It defines what resources are available to whom. It defines whether or not resources are being effectively used or should potentially be used elsewhere. It defines whether there are more resources somewhere available to be used in a different way. It gives leadership, the governor, the government, the ability to make choices, to make decisions based on facts, based on data. And I think financial management is something that has all kinds of positive after effects if it's done well. And it has enormously, tremendously, and we've seen that, negative effects if not done well. And so this is, from the board's perspective, at the core of rolling out the most potentially effective and efficient government in Puerto Rico.
So, Secretary Parés, by the way, your staff has been amazing working with the staff at Oversight Board on this reform, and they have dedicated a lot of hours to this effort. So, why is so important? I mean, you have your chief of staff, your Jada, like leading the centralized accounting, HR, Christy. So why is it important to have talent like that working with you when you're working these very difficult reforms? And how can we get more of those in Hacienda?
And I think this, and I think this is an example on why the people should not focus exclusively in the head of the agency. We are as good as our team, and quite frankly, I've been blessed to have been able to recruit this type of people that are pretty much committed with public service. They have made the sacrifice to actually be part of the managerial team of Hacienda, and what we want to do is to transform this culture that we have within the managerial team down to everyone in Hacienda, so they can actually be empowered to take decisions within the agency, be allowed having the tools. Obviously, the education is a critical part. The continuous education is a critical part of this, having obviously the resources from a technology standpoint. But certainly, people like Ciris and Christy are quite an example on the talent that we can have in the public service. And we have many examples here in Hacienda. I think you have been noticing that in your analysis, and hopefully they can be able to improve their quality of life, but also be able to provide this type of knowledge to the upcomers, people like me, this new generation that maybe have the curiosity to be part of the public service. This type of reform will allow us to be able to recruit them and provide them a space within government to improve or actually to have a career herein.
Yeah, it's very important, and you have some very strong talents there. And I think as a citizen, taking my hat as a citizen away from the oversight board, it just gives me a lot of hope that there's people in your team that are so committed to making things better and to making sure that citizens receive what they deserve. And that's, we want to recruit more cities, more Christies, more Jadas into the government. Natalie, unfortunately, you're leaving. Unfortunately for a lot of us that work with you, and this reform is just getting started. So you're not going to be able to see the whole thing through as an executive director. So far, for what you have seen and your conversations with the government and with your staff, what are the things that make you believe that this reform is actually going to be able to be successful over the long term? What sort of signals you think are you have that give you hope that this reform can actually happen?
Well, there are two parts to that, and I have absolute confidence that the pilot will roll out and be very successful at Hacienda and OJP, and that the pilot will then be rolled out across all of government. such that by January of 2023, we are really pushing forward on a complete reform in government. I believe that because of two parts. One, because of you and your team, I have to be honest, your commitment and your willingness and your engagement. And second, the government has been the leadership from the secretary, the leadership from OJP, the leadership from Governor Pierluisi himself, to make this happen, this confidence, this dedication in the people who work in government and their commitment to making this experience better, their commitment to attracting more people highly qualified. So I'm confident, and I leave with every knowledge that it will get started in Hacienda, but not end there.
So I think we're all very hopeful on that, and I think the commitment of your team and Secretary Parés and Juan Carlos Blanco and OJP have been instrumental. The passion that you guys have for public service is just amazing. So, Hacienda and OJP are very important agencies for the government, but we all know that the rest of the government, there's a lot of challenges there. So why is it, and you talked a little bit about this, but can you expand a little bit on how having a strong Hacienda and having the resources, because it's not only salary adjustment, you are going to get new positions, right? There are going to critical positions that you desperately need to be able to improve and be able to better manage other agencies. So why having a strong Hacienda and a strong OJP is so important for the rest of the government?
Because as the executive director pointed out, we will be able to measure in a more effective and timely manner. And measurement is everything, specifically from a financial standpoint, how the resources are used, if we are effective in the usage of the monies. I think that the most important public policy decisions that governments make is how we use our public funds. And certainly being able to have more resources to actually improve the measurement, at the end of the day, it's going to be positive for everyone, including the citizens in Puerto Rico and the government itself, to be able to implement and to make decisions on public policy. Having said that, I think the cornerstone is Hacienda and OJP in the daily works that we perform with all the other instrumentalities, and having a more robust OJP and Hacienda will put the governor in a best position to make the most positive actions in a timely fashion. So that is certainly something that we need to prioritize, and thankful for the board that actually allows the government of Puerto Rico to start this implementation process, that we can have a very robust financial management.
So Natalie, in a couple of days, employees at Hacienda are going to be receiving those first salary adjustments, and this great team that the Secretary Parés has is going to start implementing the new reorganization of finance and accounting functions at Hacienda. So can you give a message to those employees that are not only getting a salary adjustment, but those employees that are going to be working on the transformation of finance and accounting functions of the government? They're going to start implementing those critical reforms. The message you have for them as this reform starts being implemented in Hacienda?
Well, I'm a proud public servant, and I believe in public service. And I believe in President Kennedy's ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. You are now at the forefront. You are at the forefront of this reform, which is going to go through all of government. What you accomplish in the next weeks and months will define how everything else happens going forward. And your belief in the system, your commitment to the system will translate to everyone who works with you, for you, and, frankly speaking, everyone you're able to recruit as you move forward. So I wish you great success. I wish you great confidence in what you're doing. And I wish Puerto Rico much success as a result.
Thank you, Natalie. And Secretary Parés, I'm going to give you the last word. I'm sure if you want to go in Spanish and give a message, un mensaje a tus empleados y a tu equipo y al resto de Puerto Rico sobre esta reforma.
Hopefully, I've been doing my best effort talking in English, but now I'm going to translate in Spanish. I'm a bit more eloquent and fluent in Spanish. Miren, equipo. Obviamente, como todo cambio, va a ser un reto. Ciertamente estas reformas son ambiciosas y con la ambición pues vienen unos retos de implementación que al final del día como equipo los vamos a poder enfrentar y poder implementar dándole el insumo tanto al gobernador de Puerto Rico como al componente fiscal y a la misma Junta de Supervisión Fiscal, cuáles son las lecciones que vamos a ir aprendiendo en el proceso de implementación. Yo creo que esto es un gran primer paso de lo que va a ser una reforma de servicio público más ambiciosa que el pueblo de Puerto Rico haya visto probablemente en los pasados 25 años. Y este mensaje, ojalá el gobernador también lo pueda ver, porque definitivamente él cambió un poco, o no un poco, dramáticamente el tono que estaba tomando el proceso de reclutamiento en el gobierno de Puerto Rico, donde en los pasados años se han estado implementando políticas de austeridad, particularmente contra el servidor público. Ahora uno donde se ve al servicio público como un eje de transformación de gobernanza en la isla. Y es que la verdad, el gobierno sin gente no es gobierno, el gobierno es de gente y para la gente. Y el gobernador ha tomado esto muy en serio. Yo quiero acabar, obviamente, agradeciéndole a todo el equipo de trabajo del Departamento de Hacienda que ha ayudado en la implementación de esto. Tengo que agradecerle a la Junta de Supervisión Fiscal. Han habido tiempos u otros proyectos donde tal vez han habido diferencias de opinión entre la Junta y el gobierno de Puerto Rico, pero tengo que decir que en este tópico realmente se ha demostrado que se puede trabajar en equipo y que se pueden lograr grandes cosas. El gobernador, nuevamente, mi agradecimiento por haber cumplido con su palabra. Yo comencé en el 2020 hablando con él como gobernador electo. Todo partía de la premisa de un proceso de transición, yo suministrando la información que yo sentía que era valiosa para él que entrara en funciones, y luego esa conversación se tornó en un proceso de reclutamiento. Y la verdad es que me haya dado la oportunidad de permanecer aquí en el Departamento de Hacienda y poder ver la implementación de esto es algo que me honra muchísimo y que no quiero tomar a la ligera. Y agradecido con Natalie, muchas gracias Natalie por lo que hiciste acá por el Departamento de Hacienda, permitiendo que pudiésemos implementar esta reforma, asignándonos recursos que en el proceso aprendimos ambas partes de cómo podíamos implementar esto como equipo. Y a Siris, Cristi, Jaira y Arnaldo, mis felicitaciones por lo que han hecho, y esto no acaba aquí, esto comienza aquí. Así que aprenderemos del proceso, seguiremos mejorando el producto, y nosotros no creemos que las cosas no sean mejorables. Todo tiene que pasar por un proceso de evaluación y mejoramiento continuo, y es lo que nosotros aspiramos en el Departamento de Hacienda.
Well, thanks both of you. Thanks Natalie for your commitment to this reform and for having the vision to tie this reform and include it as part of an important transformation of the government. Thank you, Secretary Parés, for your commitment to public service, for your staff have been committed to this effort. And we hope that we can do this conversation again in like 4 or 5 months and give an update to all the employees at Hacienda of how the reform is going and how this transformation is helping the life of all the employees at Hacienda. So thank you very much, and we'll talk soon, hopefully.